So we
Angela
started
Museum?
migrating
Oh, okay, great.
south, to Tampa, Clearwater area.
Yes.
And we had some great years
Oh.
there. This next segment, I am going to introduce what the whole impetus of this tribute's about, because I'm going to introduce how Siesta Key became even more than what I thought as far as my mother and father's life. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and about the relationship that I had with my father's father. So, do you ever think back when you're starting to grow up, and you start to recognize these personality, traits that you have, right? And you're like, man, I wonder where I got these from. Who did I get this from? And I thought about my dad, and I'm like, and this isn't a bad thing. He was a very reserved person. That is not me, so I know I didn't get it from him. And my mother, she was talkative, but I knew I even had something more. My grandfather and I, wow, we had this relationship that I cherish right up to the day he passed away. He had a tailor shop right downtown Pittsburgh. His father, first generation, right off the boat from Italy, and they settled in New York, came south to Pittsburgh, and my grandfather had a tailor shop for 30 years in downtown Pittsburgh, and I was enamored by it. So when I was about 11, 12 years old, whether it was Christmas break or summertime, I would, it was awesome. My parents, before I could drive, my parents would bring me over on a Friday night, and we would have dinner together. And I still remember he had this green Monte Carlo, and we would jump in the Monte Carlo and we'd drive down to a store. And I started just sitting back and watching as customers came in. Now, when it was actual customers, what I was immediately blown away by was how he could immediately identify, exactly what their needs were and connect with them and be able to, no pun intended, but tailor them to what they needed, That was an amazing skill that I knew that I had already possessed as an 11, 12-year-old. My poor mother, when we go out to dinner, right, and I was allowed to go to the bathroom by myself, I would come out of the bathroom, I'd be talking with a person, and just having a conversation like I knew this person for years. And I remember, and my mother would say, "Who is that?" I'm like, "Mom, and I knew who he was, I knew where he was from, and it was just like, she said, "You can't do that." I said, "Mom, but I didn't know how to be any other way." And that's carried on for my entire life. That's just who I am. And that's who my grandfather was. And what was so incredible was I'd watch people pop their head in. They weren't customers. They were just people that he had touched. And they would just pop their head in. They were like, "Hey, Pat, how you doing, man? How's the family?" And I'm sitting there as an 11, 12, 13-year-old kid going, wow, the impact that he has on these people. Now I know who I am. That's where I got this from. And it was just, it helped me to formulate myself. So he had this tailor. His name was Vincent. Italian guy, just loved him. And when I would go down there, I still remember There was a McDonald's right around the corner, and so when it was lunchtime, my grandfather would give me money, and I'd go down and grab us all McDonald's, and we'd all take a break. But I remember the year that Vincent said to my grandfather, look, I know you and your son's family go to Tampa Clearwater. He said, why don't you drive about 45 minutes south? There is this place called Sarasota, Florida, and they have this beach called Siesta Key. You're going to love it, Pat. Well, that summer, we started coming here. And the place is right up the street from there. It's called the Beach House. And for the rest of our time as a family, before my sister and I, were too old to come on family vacations, this is where we came. And I never realized the impact and the effect that this place had on my mother and father, to the point where they would want to build the second chapter of their life. Now we're going to flash forward to, I believe it was like late 1991. We never had family meetings. If any of you have ever had like family meetings, we never really had those. And the beauty of that is because my mother was so emphatic, and I loved it, about us having dinner together. So that's where we would talk about stuff, and we would do that, up to the point where, my sister had other things after school, or I had other things after school, but it was so, again, I miss that, guys, just that time that we had as a family together with the four of us. So I knew this was probably pretty big. I had no idea what was coming. So I remember they called us together, and now I'm 4 years older than my sister. So I graduated in 1988. I went off to school. And so I remember the meeting, and our parents told us, look, we're going to let Tara graduate from high school, which had been a year later, and then we're going to move to Sarasota full time. Now, I'm going to be honest with all of you. I was bitter. It was very bitter. And those of you who live here full time, please do not take this the wrong way. I loved coming here on vacations. It's beautiful. But I was ready to go home, And I remember pulling my mother aside later on after that and saying, Mom, I didn't know what the term snowbird meant. But I remember saying to her, I said, Mom, I know you don't like the winters here anymore, but why don't you, do part-time, do that. Mm-hmm. And I remember her saying to me, Chris, we're ready to go. We're ready to go. And it took me a long time to make peace with that. And I finally did. I did. And they weren't kidding, because my sister graduated in, I think it was May or June of 1992. I wasn't able to come to her high school graduation. I was still off in school. They had already put the house on the market. It sold quicker than what they thought. And as the story goes, not only did she have a graduation party, it was an also we're leaving party. And the moving truck was already in our driveway. So they did the graduation party that night, and the next day they were on the road to here. And it's too dark now, but right up there. Now, when they moved here, you could still see the beach, but it was 221 Tenacity Lane, and that's where the final part of this deal starts. Now, Tara, I want to tell you, and I should tell you this more often, but I am so proud of you. You had a vision. She always wanted to be an attorney. She had that from the time she was a teenager, and she followed through with it. And I was so blessed to see her graduate from undergrad and graduate from law school. And by the way, not only did she get her law degree, she also found her future husband, and they are celebrating 27 years this year. So proud of her. And you know Mom and Dad are, but it's worth repeating. You just stayed to it, and you did it. And they have 3 wonderful boys who are all starting to make their impact in the world, and I know they're going to be just as successful as you. Me, I had a little different path. I remember my mother came to a talent show that I had in 6th grade, and I've always loved to be in front of people. I told you this early on in my tribute. It's a passion of mine. I love to be in front of people. So I guess I saw the show at this talent show. Well, as my mother told me later, my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Phillips, I know we've all had teachers that stuck in your mind that you will never forget, and Mrs. Phillips will always be that person. She was amazing. And she pulls my mother aside and she says, I don't think you understand this gift that your son has, about just being so free and open and just charismatic in front of people. I think, you may want to get him into acting. Well, that summer, I started taking acting classes. And I was pretty good at it. I started getting written up in the local paper when I was 13, 14 years old. Got leads all the way through high school. I loved it. And look, up until about 12 years ago, I had a really full head of Italian hair. I was a pretty good looking guy. I thought I was going to be the next Tom Cruise. I did. I make no bones about that. And I had people in my ear from the time I was, like I said, 15, 16 years old. Chris, you have the talent to do this. Well, I'm only going to go so far with this, but this is what I'm willing to say. When it became pretty apparent that this was going to be my career decision, did not sit very well with my father, and our relationship became extremely strained, and I thank my mother. She's always been my rock, but I never needed her more than this time, because it was very, very hard. But what I will say is, by the end, and what I mean by the end, the last 6-7 years before they both passed, my father and I were able to reconcile a lot of things, and I finally got the relationship with my dad that I always wanted. I always had it with my mom. I mean, her and I was like this, but I always wanted that with my dad, and I finally got it. And I'm so thankful and blessed that that was able to happen. But I got accepted into a pretty prestigious Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati for acting and music. And one of the amazing parts of being accepted to a school like that, most of the faculty was either still in the profession and teaching part-time, or were in the profession and now teaching full-time. And I picked a lot of their brains. And I remember one of the conversations that I had with one of my instructors that has stuck with me to this day. And I remember them saying, Chris, some of the most talented people, and whether it's New York or Hollywood, we've never even heard of. Why? Because they never got a break. And I remember, and it's still to this day the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. I walked away from a dream that I had from when I was 12 years old. And I'm thankful that I did, because of that. So it was even harder for my dad to wrap his head around, okay, he wanted to do this, and now he's walking away. And I knew I was going to struggle for a while. I didn't think it was going to be as long as what it did. And I remember early 1993, I'm still in Cincinnati having a conversation with my mother. And those of you who know the impact that my mother had on me, I couldn't say no to her. She'd tell me to, drive through a wall, and I'd say, all right, Mom, how fast do you want me to do it? That's the kind of relationship we had. She said, why don't you come here? And I said, Mom, you know how I am. I'm a four-season guy. I can't do this. She's like, Chris, just try it. Well, I did. And June 1993, I got here. And right up there. And, when I went off to college and people found out that I was from Pittsburgh, they're like, whoa, do you guys ever have any warm weather there? I said, people, yes, we do. I said, yes, we have intense winters, but we have summer. Summer's pretty hot. So the first couple of months I was here, it wasn't a big deal, But what I was used to was beginning of September, humidity starts to break and it starts to get a little cooler. We start to go into this beautiful season of fall. And it didn't. Then we went in October, November. I remember I'm standing right out there. I was on the phone with my best friend from high school, and I got off the phone with him. It's 87 degrees, I'll never forget it. And my mother comes out, and she's like, Chris, isn't this beautiful? I look at her, I said, no, it's not. And that was the thing, and I say to her a heck of a lot longer than what I ever thought I would. I said, no, Mom, it's not. I could never wrap my head around not having, I am a four-season guy, guys. And that's why I said earlier, those of you who live here full-time or from here, please don't take us the wrong way. It's just, it's not me. But besides being a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service, I'm also an instructor. And every class that I've ever taught in all my years of doing that, I will give my intro bio and I will tell this exact thing. I'm like, there are three amazing things that happened in my time here. First of all, I got bonus time with my parents. And remember I said earlier, I said there's going to be a common thread through this entire story about family. And my mother and I and my father, man, we would schedule at least one time a week, sometimes even more. We would go to dinner, we would do things that if I didn't live here, I wouldn't have had that, It would have been, a vacation, or it would have been a special event. So I'll never forget that, those years that I got extra, so to speak, with them. And the second thing, and wow, probably the most important, is I was already divorced from my first wife by the time I was 30. And I knew that there was a woman out there for me. I'm watching my parents, who were married for 55 years, and just the beautiful, relationship that they had, still holding hands after 45, 50 years. Just, I loved it the older I got. I knew she was out there. And in late 2003, I'm working for UPS, and Christina Wines walks into my life. And she stole my heart. And this April, we're about to celebrate 22 years together. And I love you, Chris. Love you with everything I have. And about a year and a half later, I had always had an interest in the Postal Service, because I know my personality, my loving of talking to people and building relationships. And it's not like it is now. They only open the test up every so often. And I found out from the job that I had at the time that the post office had opened up the test. And signed up. Still remember, had to go to Tampa, sitting in a room with about 700 people, and I don't get, nervous at all. I'm like, what in the world? Because I had no idea how many jobs, were available, not knowing that this was a 50-mile radius that they were trying to hire for. So, we had worked so hard. Chris bought all these prep books, and, we studied and studied and studied. I ended up getting an 84 out of 100. And early 2006, I got in. And this year I'm celebrating 20 years with the Postal Service, and I'm so thankful what that has brought Chris and I for our family. So with that, to pull us all together, and I told you earlier, I wrote this, I rewrote it, I wrote it, rewrote. I was trying to think of this really cool finale. And then I'm like, Chris, stop. Just stop. 2 words. Pull this all together. And it's thank you. So, Mom, Dad, I just want to thank you for the love and support and guidance that you gave Tara and I, the undying devotion to our family, and the foundation that you instilled in us that has allowed us to become the people that we are today. And I'll never forget it. So thank you. God bless all of you. Thank you.